CBS News is now projecting the outcome of all 50 states in the presidential election. And while President-elect Joe Biden leads with 306 electoral votes, President Trump is doubling down on his refusal to concede. Writing in all caps last night, the president tweeted that he won the election. The tweet was quickly flagged by Twitter. It followed a series of posts where Mr. Trump continued to push claims of a rigged election, despite there being no evidence of widespread voter fraud. Meanwhile, over the weekend, the president did seem to acknowledge defeat, giving some hope that the White House was ready to begin working on a transition to the Biden administration. But as Weijia Jiang explains, that's no longer appears to be the case.
As President Trump played golf at his club in Virginia on Sunday, two of the top doctors on the coronavirus task force spoke publicly about the importance of working with the Biden team.
This is not a political issue. This is an issue of public health and saving American lives.
It's almost like passing a baton in a race. You don't want to stop and then give it to somebody. You want to just essentially keep going. And that's what transition is.
President-elect Joe Biden's chief of staff said they need to learn more about implementing a vaccine.
Our experts need to talk to those people as soon as possible so nothing drops in this change of power we're going to have on January 20th.
But the White House said details about a vaccine are already available on the CDC website and said there are no plans for the task force to meet with Biden's team. The West Wing staff appears to be taking cues from the president, who for the first time ever seemed to acknowledge he lost the election, tweeting he won because the election was rigged. But Mr. Trump quickly backpedaled, declaring he wasn't conceding. There is no evidence the election was rigged. The campaign has filed about 20 lawsuits so far, losing nearly all of them. In Pennsylvania on Sunday, the legal team dropped a major portion of its federal lawsuit over mail-in ballots. Even a win in this case would not change the results. Still, President Trump's baseless claims of fraud are fueling his supporters. Mr. Trump rode through the crowds as thousands marched through the streets of Washington, D.C. on Saturday.
We are the majority.
While the protests were largely peaceful, as the night wore on, fights broke out between Trump supporters and counter-protesters. D.C. police made 21 arrests, and 4 police officers were injured while responding to the clashes.
All right, so Weijia Jiang is joining us now. Weijia, I want to start with something that you touched on in your story. You asked White House Deputy Communications Director and Deputy Press Secretary Brian Morgenstern about whether the White House COVID-19 task force has any plans to meet up with Biden's COVID-19 advisory board. What was the response?
So in this inquiry, Anne-Marie, I did include all the quotes from Dr. Fauci and Admiral Brett Giroir, who yesterday spoke out publicly to explain exactly why a smooth transition must include working with the Biden team and with the very health officials who will ultimately replace them. Dr. Fauci said it's like a baton during a race. You don't want to stop the race and then hand over the baton, but you want to have a smooth transition. And so that's why they said they really want to meet with this incoming team. And I also included what the Biden chief of staff said, which really touched on the importance of the vaccine distribution. And so at first, as I mentioned in the piece, the White House official said that, look, everything that they need to know about vaccines is already on the website. And secondly, he added that respectfully meet about what their plan, aside from devastating and counterproductive lockdowns and an unconstitutional mask mandate, was plagiarized from the Trump administration. And the reason why this was so surprising is because we just heard from officials who said, look, this is not a political issue anymore. This is about saving American lives and public health. And this statement that we got was certainly charged politically as the administration continues to put a barrier between their team and the Biden team. It is no longer a competition. It is about coming together, and that just doesn't seem to be happening.
And so, Weija, in addition to the coronavirus pandemic that this country is currently facing, there are still geopolitical threats, Iran, North Korea, Russia. There are things happening outside of the United States that directly impact Americans and our interests abroad, but also here at home. And it's so is the position of the Trump administration right now that they're not going to share anything. They're not going to share those national security briefings that president-elects and vice president-elects typically get once they win the election. All of that is on hold until when? Inauguration Day?
Well, you know, the Biden team has already signaled that they could challenge this legally if, in fact, this sort of behavior that begins at the top, right, from President Trump's cues continues, because they have to have access to resources and this information that we're talking about, not only with regard to the pandemic, but as you mentioned so rightfully, Vlad, about national security, and they have to be ready to go. There is no lag time. And so we have to wait to see what steps they actually take. But the fact is that, you know, in a few weeks, these votes are going to really count when the Electoral College puts them into place. And the election, by the way, is already over. And so the president's state of denial continues to delay things that are inevitable. And so he can, you know, say what he wants to, along with his administration and legal team, but the facts are this transition is happening, whether he likes it or not.
Yeah, and meanwhile, you know, Biden and his team are continuing on like the transition is happening. Joe Biden has talked a lot about the need for a second stimulus package. He's spoken to Nancy Pelosi. He's spoken to Chuck Schumer. I'm wondering, considering, you know, Mitch McConnell prior to the or just after he won his re-election bid, talked about how he was ready to get down to work and hammer out another stimulus package. Has anyone from Joe Biden's team spoken to Mitch McConnell about getting this done?
Well, Joe Biden himself said about a week ago that he plans to speak with McConnell, and these two have a long history of working together, of negotiating against one another, but ultimately striking deals on Capitol Hill. So I do think that there is promise ahead if a package is not hammered out before Inauguration Day. And so we know that they have not spoken yet, at least to our knowledge, but the plans are there to do that. And it's interesting because the Senate Majority Leader publicly is not yet acknowledging or recognizing or congratulating President-elect Biden, because he says there will be a time and a place to do that. And I think what you've seen not only from McConnell but other Republicans is really self-awareness about the impact that President Trump has and that Donald Trump will continue to have even after he leaves the White House. So they're really trying to walk a fine line here of giving the president some space to make these declarations, even if they are false, and also moving forward with the teams that they need to. So to answer your question, it does look like, you know, they will be working together to get this aid, this critical aid to Americans. But the timeline, you know, we'll have to wait to see when that happens. If the Trump administration ultimately and Democrats can hash something out before Biden takes over the White House.
You know, we mentioned that the president over the weekend and just this morning tweeted again, "I won the election." During his 60 Minutes interview, former President Barack Obama said, you know, we would never accept one of our kids behaving that way. If one of my daughters pouted and then accused the other side of cheating when they lost, when there was no evidence of it, we would scold them. So you mentioned in your piece that the Trump campaign scrapped a major part of its federal lawsuit challenging Pennsylvania's election results. At this point, Weija, it does really seem, if we take our viewers back to the inauguration of President Trump and the lie that Sean Spicer iterated at the podium there about having those numbers of people at the inauguration, which proved not to be true. If you take it back even further, President Trump, when he was still a candidate and before that, was the chief sort of promoter of birtherism, the lie that President Obama was not born in the United States. And now here we are at the end of the Trump administration and the president tweeting, "I won the election." Does anybody in the White House sort of see what is evident to a lot of other people, which is that this has been this is something that has been ongoing in this White House for last 4 years?
Well, I think, Vlad, when you say something that has been ongoing, I think what you're referring to is the president's obsession with numbers. And we have seen that throughout his presidency. The bigger, the better, with regard to crowd sizes, with regard to many things that he has tried to accomplish on his agenda. This is the mentality that the president often has. Ironically, not with the stimulus bill, though. It should be mentioned that he wants a very narrow bill, and it's the Democrats who want something bigger and broader. But in general, bigger is better for President Trump. So it is interesting that you mentioned the crowd size and how we've sort of come full circle, because the White House press secretary said about 1 million people filled the streets over the weekend, which is just not true. And so, I think that there's just an acceptance that oftentimes what happens is, because the president likes to be his own messenger in chief, he sort of sets the headline and they have to work around that and try to support that, even if that headline is not accurate. There are ways using semantics to try to appeal to the president, and they've also learned what not to say in order to prevent him from being displeased. And so, this is just something that I think everyone around him has grown accustomed to, especially after nearly 4 years here at the White House.
Yeah, it's something Anne-Marie, you say this often, and you just said it sort of similarly, Weija, that the president sometimes uses language that leaves room open for interpretation. But tweeting, "I won the election," there is no room for interpretation there. That's just not true.
It's just not true. And, I think yesterday, and we briefly talked about this, the president tweeted he won because the election was rigged. He being Joe Biden, even though he did not mention his opponent by name. And then I think all of a sudden the president realized, oh, wait, did I just say Biden won? He did. And that's why he spent so much time, along with his surrogates, both online and in person, trying to clean up what the president said, even though it was a fact. The fact is that Joe Biden is the president-elect. And so what we've seen since the president acknowledged that was a lot of backpedaling. And the president wants everybody to know that he didn't mean it, that what he meant was Joe Biden won in the eyes of what he says is the fake news media, in the eyes of Democrats, but not in reality. Of course, that is not true.
Weija Jiang for us.
Yeah, that's also not true, Weija, because even sort of based on kind of that warped logic between illegal votes and legal votes, I mean, look at the legal challenges. We can clearly see that there were not any illegal votes, and if there were, they were so minor that it would not have made a difference. So even by the president's own logic, he did not win this election.
Even by his own Department of Homeland Security, that has come out to say that this was the most secure election in U.S. history. And so, this is another example of the president contradicting either his own intelligence community or other agencies. And, he could resolve this if he or his lawyers just presented evidence to support their baseless claims. And that is one thing they have not been able to do.
Weija Jiang for us at the White House. Weija, we appreciate it as always. Thank you.
Thank you.